In the dim hush of Harrogate Manor, where grief clung to the walls as stubbornly as old ivy, the day began with whispers sharp enough to cut through the morning frost. Servants moved in cautious patterns, their footsteps softened by years of habit and a shared fear disturbing the household's fragile quiet. The Duke had returned from the war months ago, yet the estate had not recovered from the weight of his sorrow, nor from the absence of the Duchess, whose portrait still overlooked the grand hall like a silent accusation. Beneath that painted gaze, rumors traveled swiftly, weaving themselves into corners where dust and curiosity gathered in equal measure. Eleanor Clark, a modest maid with a talent for mending torn hems and comforting troubled hearts, found herself at the center of the morning's murmurs. She had spent the early hours soothing young Clara, the Duke's timid daughter, whose nightmares had worsened since Lady Aurelia's arrival 2 days prior. Clara had clung to Eleanor's skirts, trembling, and Eleanor had whispered soft assurances until the child's breathing steadied. The gesture, innocent as a prayer, had not gone unnoticed by the household. Overstepping again, Mrs. Worthing muttered loudly as Eleanor handed folded linens to another maid. The housekeeper's voice carried the superiority of a woman who believed herself the guardian of proper boundaries. "You forget your place far too easily." Heat rose Eleanor's cheeks. "I meant no harm, ma'am." The young miss was frightened. "That child must learn discipline, not dependence." Mrs. Worthing sniffed, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Lady Aurelia will not approve of servants meddling with the children's affections." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Lady Aurelia herself swept into the corridor, her silk skirts whispering like a warning. Her beauty was polished, deliberate, the kind that gleamed under candlelight but cast no warmth. She paused upon seeing Eleanor, her expression tightening by a fraction. "There she is," Aurelia said coolly, "the maid who insists on lingering near the Duke's children." Her gaze traveled over Eleanor, as though assessing an imperfection on a valuable surface. "I do hope you are not attempting to secure attention by exploiting their vulnerabilities." The accusation struck like a slap. Eleanor instinctively clasped her hands together to still their trembling. "My lady, I only sought to comfort Miss Clara." "Comfort?" Aurelia's eyebrow arched in disdain. "Your duty is obedience, not attachment. Children must not be indulged by servants seeking emotional significance." Around them, servants froze, their silence heavy with fear of entanglement. Eleanor swallowed a protest. She could not defend herself without risking the housekeeper's wrath, or worse, Lady Aurelia's cruelty. Unseen above them, concealed behind the ornate lattice of the gallery, Duke Alastair Harrow watched with a stiffened posture, his cane balanced against his knee, his breath shallow with the ache that war had left in his ribs. He had chosen this hidden vantage in a moment of uncertainty, unsure whether the woman he was expected to marry possessed the kindness she paraded in society. Yet what he saw below struck at something buried deeper than doubt. He watched his daughter shrink behind Mrs. Worthing's skirt, and watched Eleanor's chin dip in humiliation, though she had done nothing but offer comfort where comfort was desperately needed. Aurelia crossed her arms, her voice edged with condescension. "See that you remember your station, Miss Clark. This household cannot afford sentimentality among its staff." Eleanor bowed her head. "Yes, my lady." "And wipe that expression from your face," Aurelia added sharply. "You look as though you expect sympathy." Eleanor bit the inside of her cheek, fighting the sting rising behind her eyes. Sympathy was the last thing she expected. She wanted only to serve faithfully, to protect the children whose lives had been reshaped by loss long before she entered their world. The corridor's air grew painfully still as Aurelia turned away, satisfied by the spectacle she had crafted. Clara reached for Eleanor, but Mrs. Worthing quickly intercepted her, murmuring something about propriety. The little girl's shoulders slumped as she was led away. Eleanor stood rooted for a moment, the humiliation sinking through her like cold rain. She gathered the linen she had dropped during the confrontation and forced her steps toward the servants' stairwell, praying for a quiet corner where she could breathe without witness. Above, the Duke's hand tightened around the carved railing. The rigid composure he showed the world cracked slightly at the edges as he watched the maid retreat, her dignity bruised by a criticism she did not deserve. He had expected discomfort today, perhaps awkwardness, but not cruelty. Aurelia's voice still rang in his ears, sharp, dismissive, unbecoming a woman meant to help raise his children. His children. They were his only compass now, fragile and wary of strangers. And Eleanor, a woman with no expectation of reward, seemed to understand them with intuitive gentleness, a gentleness Aurelia lacked entirely. For a long moment he remained still, listening to the fading echoes of footsteps below. Then he exhaled slowly, a sound weighted with an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel since the war. Unease, tinged with something dangerously close to hope. Hope that the truth, whatever it was, might reveal itself before he bound his life to a woman incapable of warmth. Eleanor descended the stairs, unaware of the eyes that followed her. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath, willing her emotions into order. She had survived humiliation before, and she would endure this too. Yet as she entered the quiet dimness of the lower hall, a single tear escaped, sliding down her cheek in defiance of her resolve. Far above, the Duke whispered to the empty gallery, "You are the only one who sees them." In that fragile moment, a resolve formed within him, subtle yet undeniable, that he would watch more closely, listen more carefully, and learn which heart in his household beat with genuine truth. For the fate of his children, and perhaps his own wounded spirit, depended on it. If you're ready for the next part, say, construct section 2. The morning after Eleanor's humiliation dawned beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver, the sort that foretold a day of cold revelations. Harrogate Manor stirred uneasily, for Lady Aurelia had declared her intention to observe the household with greater precision, a phrase that sent shivers through the servants' quarters. Eleanor kept her gaze low as she performed her duties, though her mind tugged relentlessly toward the memory of Clara's frightened grasp and the Duke's unseeing gaze, something she had not sensed, but somehow felt in the hollowness that followed the confrontation. She wished for invisibility, yet fate seemed determined to thrust her into the path of scrutiny she had never sought. While delivering fresh linen to the nursery, Eleanor noticed a small object resting upon Clara's pillow, a tiny wooden soldier, meticulously carved, its expression fierce in miniature defiance. She recognized it instantly. It had belonged to the late Duchess's keepsake collection, forbidden for any servant to touch. Clara must have taken it during one of her nighttime wanderings. Eleanor's breath caught. If discovered, the child would face Aurelia's disdain, or worse, the cold reprimand of Mrs. Worthing. Gently, she tucked the soldier into her apron, intending to return it to its rightful place without drawing attention to Clara's quiet rebellion. Before she could turn away, the nursery door creaked, and young James stepped inside. Unlike his sister, the boy wore an expression carefully arranged to reveal nothing. He was his father's son in that way, reserved, difficult to read, but observant beyond his years. His eyes dropped Eleanor's apron, then lifted again with pointed curiosity. "That toy," he said quietly, "was my mother's." His voice trembled with a vulnerability he rarely showed. Eleanor kneeled to meet his gaze. "I will keep it safe and return it, Master James. Your sister meant no harm." The boy studied her, considering, then nodded once. "You are kind to her, and to me." His next words fell even softer. "Lady Aurelia is not." Eleanor hesitated, uncertain how to respond without crossing dangerous boundaries. "Your father will see what is right," she whispered, though she had no certainty of it. James accepted this with the solemnity of one who carried far too much for a child. He slipped away just as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. Lady Aurelia swept inside with her usual chill, accompanied by Mrs. Worthing, who appeared eager to catch some trespass. Aurelia's gaze skimmed the room before settling on Eleanor with a sharp focus. "There you are again, Miss Clark, hovering near the children as if you are something indispensable." Her eyes narrowed. "What is that bulge in your apron?" Fear stabbed through Eleanor, but she carefully produced a wooden soldier, prepared to speak of Clara's distress. Aurelia intercepted the gesture with a scoff. "Stealing from the Duchess's belongings, are we? Quite the ambition for a maid of your standing." "Eleanor would never steal," James said, appearing again at the doorway with surprising courage. "The toy belongs to Clara. She was frightened last night." Aurelia turned her displeasure upon him. "Your sister must learn restraint. And you, young sir, Must learn when to hold your tongue. Her rebuke hung in the air like a poisoned thread, long enough for Duke Alistair to step into the nursery, unnoticed until the servants bowed in startled unison. He regarded the scene with quiet intensity, his gaze drifting from the wooden soldier to Eleanor's trembling hands, then to the rigid set of Aurelia's shoulders. "Explain," he said, his voice low but carrying authority. Aurelia launched into a tidy narrative of disobedient children and manipulative servants, her tone dripping with the conviction of a woman accustomed to being believed. Yet the Duke's attention fixed on Eleanor, whose silence now seemed less like guilt and more like the burden of someone accustomed to undeserved reprimand. When Aurelia finished, Alistair raised a hand. "Miss Clark, is this true?" Eleanor swallowed hard. The toy was on Miss Clara's pillow. "I intended only to return it before anyone noticed. I did not wish for her to be scolded." Her honesty was simple, unadorned, and carried none of the self-defense Aurelia likely expected. The Duke's jaw tightened. "You did correctly." His gaze slid to Aurelia, then, cool as winter stone. "And you, madam, would do well to remember that compassion is not a defect." Aurelia's expression flickered with indignation, but propriety forced her to bow her head. "As you wish, your grace." Eleanor felt the moment shift, though she dared not breathe in relief. She sensed danger instead, subtle, creeping, the kind that clung to one's steps. For Aurelia did not forgive easily, and humiliation in the presence of the Duke was a wound she would not let rest. The scandal erupted before midday. Word spread among the staff that a trinket had been found in Eleanor's quarters, a silver brooch bearing the crest of Harrogate, delicately tucked beneath her pillow. Mrs. Worthing stormed through the servants' hall, brandishing it as proof of Eleanor's deceit. "Bold as brass," she cried, "stealing from the Duke himself." Eleanor stared in disbelief, her voice barely escaping her throat. "I have never seen that brooch. Someone placed it there." Yet her protests were swallowed by the rising tide of whispers. Thief. Ambitious. Trying to ensnare the Duke's attention. Shock hollowed her chest. How swiftly a household could turn against her. The children, frantic with fear, attempted to intervene, but Mrs. Worthing restrained them. "Not another word from either of you," she commanded, dragging them away. Eleanor stood alone in the corridor as servants avoided her gaze. Some from disdain, others from quiet sympathy they dared not express. She knew only one thing with certainty. Someone wanted her gone. Before Mrs. Worthing could summon the authorities, the Duke himself appeared, his expression unreadable. He dismissed the gathered servants with a gesture, then held up the brooch between two fingers. "Miss Clark," he said softly, "who placed this in your room?" "I do not know, your grace," she whispered. "But it was not I." He studied her, his gaze searching deeper than mere words. "I believe you." The admission felt like a lifeline, fragile yet unmistakable. "And I intend to uncover who would commit such treachery beneath my roof." Tears threatened, but she lifted her chin. "Thank you, your grace." His voice lowered, laced with a quiet conviction. "No innocent person in my household shall be condemned, not while I draw breath." For the first time, hope flickered, not gentle, but fierce enough to defy the tide closing around her. The rain had begun its soft descent long before Eleanor realized she had wandered too far into the West Wing, her candle trembling in her grasp as a distant rumble threaded through the corridors like a warning. She had meant only to return a book to the children's schoolroom, a slim collection of fables Arthur had pressed into her hands with shy pride, but the quiet of the sleeping estate had tugged her forward, urging her to walk, to breathe, to think. Her thoughts were a restless tempest. Lady Frances, the Duke's strange silences, the children's growing affection, the unspoken fear that she was drifting into a world in which she did not belong. When she paused beside a tall window, watching the rain streak down the panes in trembling silver lines, she felt the weight of that truth settle on her shoulders. She was a maid with a gentle heart and limited prospects, and he was a Duke whose duties were carved into the bones of tradition. Nothing more could exist between them. Nothing spoken, nothing imagined. The candle flickered, as if in protest. She turned, and nearly dropped the candle altogether. The Duke stood several paces away, the dim glow casting an amber halo along his cheekbone, leaving the rest of his face half swallowed in shadow. His expression was unreadable, too still, too carefully reined to decipher. It was the first time he had approached her without pretense or the veil of distant superiority, and she felt her breath catch, a soft flutter against her ribs. "I did not mean to startle you," he said quietly. His voice carried the low timbre of conflicting emotions, weariness, restraint, and something far more dangerous, longing. She lowered her gaze, pulse pounding. "Your Grace, apologies. I had no intention of wandering where I should not. This house has too many corridors for anyone pretending to know where they belong." He took a single step closer, not touching her, yet the space between them crackled with awareness. "You need not fear reprimand." The words melted her tension, but only barely. She forced her voice to steady itself. "Is there something you require of me?" His breath left him in a slow, pained exhale. "Yes," he said, but then stopped, as though startled by his own honesty. "No. His jaw tightened. "I simply wish to speak with you." Eleanor felt her heart stumble. No conversation with him had ever been casual. Every exchange had been wrapped in formality, duty, protective distance. Now he seemed stripped of all three. "I owe you an apology," he continued, lifting his gaze to hers. "These past weeks, you have borne the weight of my silence, my demands, my scrutiny. I have observed you more than any maid should be observed. I have watched you with my children, with my household, with my—" He hesitated, breath quivering, "with my conscience." Her lips parted, but words deserted her. The rain beat harder against the glass, like frantic fingertips. "You must think me cold," he said, "or cruel. Perhaps both." "I think neither," she whispered. He blinked, slow, stunned. Eleanor tightened her grip on the candle. "Your grief is still near. And this house, this life, carries expectations few could endure with kindness alone." His throat bobbed, his composure thinning. "You speak as though you see through me." "I only see what the children see," she murmured. "A man who tries, even when his heart is weary." A quiet, aching sound escaped him, half a breath, half a surrender. The Duke braced a hand against the window frame beside her, his arm close enough for her to feel the warmth beneath his coat. She looked up despite herself. His eyes held hers with a gravity that pulled her whole being toward him. "Eleanor," he said softly, her name turning to a confession on his tongue. "I must tell you a truth that has tormented me." Her pulse tripped. "My engagement to Lady Frances was never born of affection. It was crafted by Parliament and family pressure, an alliance, a strategy, not sentiment. I accepted it because I believed my children needed stability. A duchess, a proper example." He paused, shaking his head slightly. "But she is not that. You know it. I know it." Eleanor tried to look away, but his gaze held her captive. "You have given my children more in a fortnight than society has ever expected of a future duchess," he said. "You listen when Lady Frances parades indifference. You comfort when she displays pride. You understand every unspoken fear my daughter carries, every quiet need my son hides behind obedience." His voice dropped. "How do you do that? How did you learn their heart so quickly?" Her eyes stung. "Because," she whispered, "I once needed someone to do the same for me." He inhaled sharply, as if her answer pierced straight through a layer of armor. A long moment passed, breathless, suspended. The world beyond the corridor faded into rain and night. Eleanor could feel the shift within him, the battle between duty and desire, between propriety and truth. His hand flexed against the window frame, then slowly lowered until it hovered near hers. He did not touch her, but the implication sang through the space between them. "You must think me a fool," he murmured, "for allowing my heart to stir when it should remain silent." She swallowed. "Your Grace, you must not." "You fear I dishonor you?" he asked gently. "I fear I dishonor myself," she confessed, voice trembling. "For entertaining a dream I have no right to hold." He closed his eyes briefly, anguish carving lines along his brow. When he opened them again, they burned with quiet fire. "If ever I have dishonored anyone, it is myself," he said, "by pretending I did not see you, by forcing distance where there was no indifference, by letting society dictate what my heart should choose." Eleanor felt her breath falter, the truth of his words echoing within her like a bell struck in stillness. "My heart is not free to speak," he whispered, "but it is no longer silent." Her candle flickered, the flame thinning, quivering. "Then what would you have me do?" she asked, the question escaping before she could restrain it. The Duke stepped back, not out of rejection, but out of pained reverence. "You must do nothing," he said. "Nothing at all. I will bear the consequences of my own honesty." He bowed his head, a gesture of rare vulnerability. "But know this, Eleanor. The path ahead is fraught with scandal, and tomorrow may demand a choice neither of us feels prepared to make." The candle extinguished, plunging them into darkness. And Eleanor, heart racing as the storm raged outside, knew her life had just crossed an invisible threshold from which neither of them could ever return. Morning arrived pale and trembling, as though the sky itself feared the scandal poised to break within Langstone Hall. A heavy mist drifted across the lawns, muting the world in a somber hush. Eleanor stood in the nursery beside the window, hands clasped tightly before her as she watched the fog cling to the trees. The events of the night had not left her. The Duke's voice, raw with confession, echoed like a forbidden hymn inside her chest. She had scarcely slept, afraid that rest would shatter the fragile reality his words had created. Now, in the soft gray light, doubt pressed upon her with renewed force. Whatever storm awaited them, she could not, must not, be its cause. She turned when she heard the sound of small footsteps. Arthur stood in the doorway, clutching his wooden soldier, his dark eyes unusually solemn. "Miss Eleanor," he whispered, "is father angry today?" Her heart softened. "No, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" "Because Lady Frances was shouting earlier," he said quietly, "about papers and disgrace, and how she will not be made a fool of." Eleanor's breath caught. So it had begun. Before she could speak, little Clara padded in behind her brother, eyes wide, her curls still tousled from sleep. "Will we be sent away?" she asked with tremor, as though the idea had haunted her dreams. Eleanor knelt, gathering both children close. "You will not be sent anywhere," she promised, though she prayed her voice sounded more confident than she felt. "Your father loves you more than any whisper or quarrel could ever change." A deeper voice answered from behind her. "Miss Eleanor speaks the truth." She rose slowly. The Duke stood in the doorway, dressed but unloved, his expression drawn yet resolute. The children ran to him at once, and he rested a hand on each small shoulder before lifting his gaze to Eleanor. Gratitude, quiet, aching gratitude, shimmered there. "May I speak with you?" he said. "In the east drawing room?" Her pulse stumbled. "Yes, your grace." The walk to the corridors felt endless, each step punctuated by distant murmurs of servants and the unmistakable raised voice of Lady Frances, somewhere in the southern wing. Eleanor kept her eyes lowered, afraid her composure might fracture as she met his gaze again. Once inside the drawing room, he closed the door, shutting out the tumult of the household. The silence that followed was weighted, intimate. He turned toward her. "Lady Frances has withdrawn her acceptance," he said calmly, though the set of his jaw betrayed tension. "She accused the household of conspiring against her reputation, and me of conducting myself without honor. She intends to take her grievances to her father." Eleanor felt her heart sink. "Your Grace, I am sorry." He shook his head. "Do not apologize for a truth that was inevitable. Her ambition far exceeded her affection for my children, or for anyone who does not advance a position." His eyes softened. Ending the arrangement was a mercy disguised as scandal. "But society will judge you," Eleanor whispered. "Society has judged me since the day I returned from war," he replied, voice steady. "I have no expectation that their opinion will ever align with my own conscience." He took a step closer. "But you," he added, "have taught me that conscience still matters." She inhaled sharply, struggling to maintain her composure. "Your Grace, please." He raised a hand, not in command but in supplication. "Eleanor, last night I came close to saying words I had no right to utter. Today, with the engagement dissolved, I stand on a precipice between duty and desire. Before I choose my path, I must know one thing." His voice lowered, trembling with honesty. "Do you regret hearing my confession?" Her breath fluttered. Her fingers twisted together, unsure where truth ended and danger began. "I regret only that my heart is not made of stone." A faint, pained smile touched his lips, nor his mine. He took another step, closing the space between them until only a breath separated them. He did not reach for her. His restraint was its own form of reverence. "Eleanor," he murmured, "you have given my children warmth where I offered only structure. You have given my household peace where I offered only order. You have given me hope where I believed none remained. I cannot ignore what I feel, but I will not act unless you grant me leave to speak freely." The room spun softly around her. The fire crackled. Beyond the windows, the mist began to lift, revealing the faint outline of sunlight pressing against the clouds. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering courage. "You may speak freely," she whispered. He exhaled, a sound of quiet relief, as if years of restraint had finally loosened their grip on him. "I care for you," he said simply, not as a duke for a servant, nor as a man seeking comfort, but as someone who has found his heart unexpectedly restored by your presence. "I admire your gentleness, your courage, your unshakable loyalty to those smaller than yourself. You become vital to this household and to me." Emotion swelled in her chest, fragile and overwhelming. "Your Grace, what future could such words possibly hold? I am of no rank. I have no dowry, no standing." "You have honor," he said firmly, "and strength, and compassion. These are qualities a duchess should possess, though few ever do." "But the scandal," she protested, "the scrutiny." "I would weather 100 scandals," he said, "if it meant choosing what is right rather than what is merely expected." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. "You honor me beyond measure." "I seek not to honor you," he whispered, "but to stand beside you, if you will allow it." A trembling silence fell. Then, softly, she answered, "I would." His eyes closed for the briefest moment, as if offering a silent prayer of gratitude. When he opened them again, they gleamed with something warm and certain. He offered his hand, not as a duke commanding obedience, but as a man offering partnership. She placed her hand in his, and the gesture felt more declarative than 1,000 public vows. A knock sounded sharply at the door. A footman's voice followed. "Your Grace, the children request your presence." He looked at Eleanor, a quiet smile touching his features. "Shall we?" She nodded. They walked to the nursery together, not as master and maid, nor as duke and servant, but as two souls stepping cautiously toward a future trembling with promise. As the children flung themselves into their father's arms, he lifted them easily, laughter stirring through the hall for the first time in months. Eleanor stood beside him, a soft warmth blooming in her chest. The scandal behind them had been loud, but the love growing ahead of them, slow, tender, and resilient, was destined to be far louder in the quiet places of their hearts.